Hi everyone, today I'll be teaching you how to make a concrete stool. You can use this stool in a kid's room or in your room. It's really versatile for any kind of thing you're going to need. So today what you're going to need to make one of these stools are make sure you're wearing jeans and a shirt you don't mind getting dirty, safety glasses, some gloves to make sure you don't get concrete on your hands. Today I got 3 wooden dowels that were 1.25 inches thick and we cut them at 18 inches long. You can use whatever size dowel you want. This is just the size we decided to go with. And then we have one bag of Quikrete. You can really use 1 or 2 bags. It just depends on the size of stool you're making. A 3-gallon bucket as our mold for the seat and a measuring cup. So our first step today is to make sure you have all your correct PPE on so nothing gets in your eyes or in your hands. And then you're going to pour your concrete into your bucket. Today we're going to be pouring about 15 to 20 pounds of concrete into our 3-gallon bucket. Like I said before, you can pour as much as you want. It just depends what size of stool you're wanting to make. Okay, so for your first step in making your concrete stool, you're going to want to cut your bag open and pour about roughly how big you want the stool to be. Today we're going to be pouring around 15 to 20 pounds of concrete. So our next step is going to be putting the water in our bucket. One of the most important things to learn about mixing concrete is that it's mixed very thoroughly, because you don't want some of the parts of the concrete to not be mixed and the other parts to harden too quickly. So today we're going to be stirring our concrete with just a plain wooden dowel to ensure that it gets mixed thoroughly. I don't recommend using your hands to stir the concrete because you can get it all over you, all over your clothes, and then if it hardens, you'll be in a world of trouble. So one thing we learned while reading our Quikrete bag, which it'll be different for whatever kind of concrete you buy, is that for each 80-pound bag you need 6 pints of water. So we took 6 pints and we divided it to see how many cups are in 1 pint. So we learned that there are 2 cups per pint. So since we're not using the whole 80-pound bag and we're using roughly 20, we're going to measure about 4 cups of water, stir it, and if it needs more you can add a little bit as you go. That's good. One thing we learned today is that it's very important to stay on track with your calculations. We accidentally poured too much water and not enough concrete, and our mixture is very soupy. So now we're going to be adding more concrete to fix the problem that we created. If you end up with a concrete that's too hard or too liquidy, you can just add more concrete or add more water to fix that problem. So now we're adding more concrete in to help fix the problem of the fact that we added too much water. Just remember that when making projects like this, it's okay to make mistakes. You can always fix them. Once you've gotten the correct consistency of concrete, you want to tap the bucket on the flat surface to ensure that the air bubbles are going to come through, and when it dries you won't have any bubbles. So a couple quick fast taps should do the trick. If you watch carefully while doing this, you can see the air bubbles coming to the top. Once they stop, you can stop the tapping. Once you've tapped all the air bubbles out of the concrete and gotten the correct consistency, it's time to insert your dowels. Like I said in the beginning, today we're using 1.25 inch diameter dowel, and we cut them to 18 inches long. You're going to want to set them offset from each other. You can either use 3 dowels or 4. It's really up to your preference. So you want to make sure that it touches the very bottom of the concrete, and if you get concrete on it, it's okay, you can always sand it off later. So I'm putting 1 on each side of the circle, kind of. You're going to want to push them down to make sure they get to the bottom. The most important part to remember while inserting these dowels is that none of them are too close. If they're too close to each other, like if two of them are closer than the other one, then when you try and sit on the stool, it'll become uneven and won't balance correctly. Now that we're done mixing our concrete, we need to let the concrete sit. It's recommended that Quikrete sets for about 4 hours, but just to be safe, we're going to let it sit for 12. So just overnight, just to ensure that the stool is properly hardened and that the dowels won't be able to move when it's time to take the concrete out. So now I'm going to be removing all my PPE and cleaning up our project center so the concrete can begin to set overnight. Now that we've let the concrete sit overnight, I thought it would be important to share some facts with you. By letting the concrete sit overnight, we were able to achieve 5,000 psi, whereas although the Quikrete can cure in less than 30 minutes, it would only achieve about a 400 psi. So that's why it's important, if you can, to leave the concrete to sit overnight. One thing that's important to remember about Quikrete is that it can be used for virtually anything. Many people use it for the base of an air conditioner or even for building fences. It's really good to use when using outdoors because it becomes waterproof once it's dried. Although Quikrete is not very different from regular concrete, the ingredients of Quikrete include Portland cement, gravel, sand, and stone. Now it's time to try and get our stool out of the bucket. One thing I forgot to mention before we started mixing the concrete is that we had sprayed the inside of the bucket with just like a regular cooking oil to help the process of taking it out a lot easier. The first thing we're going to do is grab the dowels that we had inserted earlier and try to peel them away from the sides of the bucket. Be careful that you don't rip the dowels out of the concrete. Just making sure you decide to change dowels each time you're pulling to release the pressure from the inside of the bucket. Once you can see the concrete lifting from the sides of the bucket, you can try and turn the bucket upside down to release the stool. Now that you can see the concrete lifting from the sides of the bucket, we're going to gently tip over the stool and see if it will release from the bucket. Now that the bucket has been released from the stool, you can see that while we were placing the dowels, we were a little bit crooked and should have measured where we put them because the stool sits a little lopsided. And you can also see that we still have some bubbles around the edges, although we were able to get a majority of the bubbles out because you can see how smooth the top of the stool is. At this part in the process of making your stool, you can sand it down and decide to paint it, but I think for today we're just gonna leave it the way it is. We kind of like the rustic look of the concrete, but you can always paint it. You can spray paint it or even use acrylic paint. You can see that because we decided to go with such a thick amount of concrete for the stool, it's very sturdy and it can hold up to 5,000 psi because we let it sit overnight.